Jason, welcome along to the podcast.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
As always, we're talking about our column for this week, and yours is titled Feeding Our Children or Dependence. That's a very interesting question, and I'm sure most viewers will have clicked to the fact that we're talking about, you guessed it, school lunches.
That's right.
It's dominated the news cycle since school began, and to be honest, I'm sick of it. So when I saw your draft come across my desk, I was like, not another one.
That's right. Well, it's actually been in the news since before school began, when we're talking about how everyone's getting sushi and these bougie lunches. So we got to cut, and we got to be more efficient. So, and then we've had a few issues, I think.
We've had a few issues.
Yeah.
They include late deliveries, uneaten meals, and most recently, exploding pies.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me about that.
The exploding pie. That, I shouldn't laugh, because what happened is some kid got burnt and had to go to the emergency department. But the way that the headline came across was like, pie explodes. And I thought, oh man, what's happened here? But it was to do with the thermonuclear temperature that it was heated to. And instead of having an aluminium peel back top, it was wrapped in plastic, and it kind of popped open and it came out and landed on the kid's leg and burnt them.
Wow.
So that's not the sort of thing that you want from a school lunch program.
No, that's right. But you say in your column, actually, the problem amid all this noise isn't actually logistics. So what is it?
So the problem, so we've had all these issues, and that's where the focus of the conversation is, because I think it was sold as a more efficient way of delivering a government program. But I think the deeper question is, or the deeper issue, shall we say, is that we're moving away from self-reliance as a people. I think New Zealand has a proud history of number 8 wire, of do it yourself, of we'll get out there and we'll fix it, and we'll, whatever the problem is, we can find a solution to it. And there's a cultural shift away from that to we'll absolve responsibility from ourselves onto someone else. And in this case, it's the central government. We expect the government to take care of us, to feed us, to clothe us, to look after us. And that, I think, is something that we need to be very careful of, because it's very easy once you start. I heard a philosopher say that when people realize they can vote free things for themselves, then they'll just vote for the person that gives them the freest thing, the most free stuff. And then that's a downward spiral from there. Yeah.
So how did we arrive at this mindset? Because it didn't happen by accident. We're a product of history. So what is our history? How did we get here?
Yeah, that's right. And we didn't even arrive at this just 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's interesting. I think New Zealand, as a smaller nation, has the ability to do things that other nations can't fairly quickly. And we have arrived at this incrementally. So back in the 1890s even, there was an expansion to the state's role. Normally, especially in the colonial era, the government was more about, we'll provide law and order, and we'll provide a framework in which for you to conduct your own lives. But as settlers or people living off the land, you're responsible for yourself. And there was this slow creep in to the point in 1901, French observer Albert Metin said, New Zealand and Australia, he included both of us in this, so it's not just New Zealand, but Australia as well, socialism without doctrine. and he said it will create as much dependence as it does progress. So we're not even idealistic socialists. We're just pragmatic, like, the government can intervene here, so we should intervene here. We can fix this problem, so we should fix this problem. And it's without any particular cohesive vision. And that was all the way back in 1901. So we're already walking down that path. Then you have World War I, you have the Great Depression, and then coming out of that, as the economic recovery starts to kick in, you get the first Labour government, and you get the Social Security Act of 1938, where the government then is supposed to provide a safety net for people who were struggling to find employment, who were relying on charity. And there were plenty of charities and churches and local groups doing that sort of work, but the government thought, well, maybe we can do it more efficiently. We've got a bit more money. And government spending actually doubled during the savage years. The 14 years increased 141% across those 14 years. Yeah. So what started as a safety net became an expectation.
Yes.
Like the government can do this, but only as a last resort, to government should do this. The government should be looking after people. They should take more responsibility for this. And it just kind of increased then. I think if you look at a report by the New Zealand Initiative, they had a report that looked at government spending over 1911 to 2023. And there's maybe two governments where spending decreased, and it was by like 2% or something like that. For the rest, it was 30% increase, 10% increase. It was continually increasing. So New Zealand has been creeping slowly, the government taking over more and more aspects of life for the past 100 and something years.
Yeah. I remember when I was studying New Zealand history at university, this period of the 38 welfare reform, it was marketed by Michael Joseph Savage as cradle to the grave, this comprehensive welfare support from the day you were born to the day you died. The government more or less said, we have a responsibility to provide for you.
Yeah, that's right.
That's pretty profound.
It is. New Zealand kind of led the world in this. We were one of the first countries to provide old age pension funds, to provide universal health care, stuff like that. And I guess the question is, why is the government the best to provide this sort of support? What makes them the best? And I haven't really arrived at the answer to the question of why is it that we think the government is the best. New Zealanders have a kind of a benign view of government. We think that the government, and Tim often says that's because we haven't had any really bad governments to deal with, that we still actually have a fairly good view of the government. And so I think that's part of it, but I haven't figured out why we go, oh, I can't fix this. Central government should fix this. Not, oh, I should turn to my neighbours. I mean, a lot of us don't know who our neighbours are, so we couldn't turn to them even if we wanted to. But I remember when I was growing up, a long time ago, I started to sound like one of those people. Back in my day, we lived in West Auckland, and there was quite a gap between the houses where we were, semi-rural, but we knew the neighbours on all three sides of our house. So we knew all three of our neighbours, and us kids would go over and play at the neighbour's house. And mum could count on them to keep an eye on us if she'd gone out or whatever. So there's that kind of lack of community. So we don't have people that we feel we can trust or rely on, so we look to the government. It's just a whole bunch of questions that I haven't quite figured out, but this column is an attempt to at least start a conversation about it.
Yeah. So really the history then, if we're looking at government spending to GDP, is one where it starts small and then really starts to grow. And even just in a sort of a logical sense, you can understand how a government would make policies, effectively make promises to provide, and for that to be very difficult to roll back. Because once you have something and someone's threatening to take that away, that's not going to win you a lot of votes. Yeah,
exactly. That comes back to the free stuff thing, right? If someone says, government says, I'll give you some free stuff, and then they do, and then another government comes and says, well, actually, I'm going to have to take that away. You're like, no way, man. You can't take my stuff, even though someone else is paying for it. Like, I mean, that's another point that I make, is there's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone's paying for the government to provide these lunches. Which I guess is why we ask these logistical questions, because we are vested interest in it, that we're paying for it. And so someone's paying for it, and we want to make sure it's delivered rightly. But is it the best way to do it? And
so the question in all of this really is then, should the government feed our children? And more broadly, I guess, well, okay, so how does this shape our view of welfare, the role of personal responsibility, the role of local communities and organizations and the government? So, I mean, what are your reflections as you think about this?
So I think that the government, central government, should not be the ones that are ultimately responsible for feeding our kids. I think that kids should be fed, hungry kids, definitely, 100%. I make that clear in the column. They deserve food. They deserve to be fed. They deserve a chance to, have, I mean, the reason we feed them is because they are at school. They can't concentrate if they have empty tummies and things like that. So there's a lot of good reasons for us to feed them. But is the government the thing to do it? I don't think so. It's a faceless bureaucracy in Wellington. It doesn't have local connections. So I think devolution down to some local, whether that's iwi, churches, charities, whatever local groups that have embedded relationships with the school community and are able to maybe even provide more than the government could via like wraparound services, support for parents, things like that. I think it's about reframing that idea that the government should look after everything. And that's the thing that I really wanted to challenge with this column was the government. We automatically look to the government whenever there's a problem. We have done for a while, but we didn't used to. It was a few decades ago. We didn't used to. But can we get back to some of that more self-reliance? Can we get back to some of that more, we can do this as a community? Because I think something really special and almost miraculous happens when a local community comes together to solve their own problem. There's a lot of spark and creativity and goodness that comes from that. And I think we sell ourselves short when we just say, I'm not going to be responsible for this. I'm going to put that responsibility on the government and they're going to be the ones to fix it.
I think it's important to note as well that there are plenty of organizations out there doing this work already.
Yeah.
The challenge is, well, are they receiving the government support that we should expect? And does that government support come with strings attached?
Yes.
Because there is also this reality where if the government agrees to fund a charity, there are some strings there. Does that limit their ability to actually help and reach out? Because one of the things you said is relationship. They have these relationships. And so this is where the wraparound support can come into play. And these issues can be addressed because these children who, of course, we want to be fed, who deserve a chance to build a better life for themselves, they often come from homes where there are issues with addiction, abuse, violence, all of these things, and that can't be fixed by a check from the government.
Yeah.
Healing can only come in the context of relationship, mentorship, support, love and care. These things a faceless bureaucracy can't achieve.
No.
But there are plenty of people out there who have a heart for people who want to make that difference. And so I think that reframing is really, really valuable as we think about the government and our assumptions about what society should look like. So Jason, thank you for this challenging column. Really appreciate your perspective, the time and the thought and the energy that went into writing it.
No, happy to do it, bro. Thanks for having me. Should the government feed children? It may seem like an obvious yes, but what if we're feeding something less desirable? The school lunch program has been plagued by late deliveries, uneaten meals, and, most recently, exploding pies. The real problem isn't logistics, it's the cultural shift away from self-reliance. Let's be clear. This is not about whether poor, hungry children deserve food. They do. A deeper philosophical question is whether we've become so accustomed to the government stepping in that we no longer ask if it should. State expansion into social welfare dates back to the 1890s. The radical expansion of the state led a French observer in 1901, Albert Metin, to describe New Zealand politics as socialism without doctrine, a place where government involvement grew arbitrarily without a grand, cohesive ideological vision. Then came the first Labour government. Bad economic times justified unprecedented measures, according to popular history. In fact, Michael Joseph Savage inherited an economy that had been in recovery for 2 years from the Great Depression. Nonetheless, the Social Security Act of 1938 introduced welfare on an unprecedented scale, embedding the expectation that the government would take primary responsibility for social well-being. By the post-war years, state control over healthcare, housing, and employment was entrenched, with government spending doubling. What began as a safety net became an expectation. Many Kiwis will ask, but isn't it good for the government to help? Isn't it fair? The problem is that when the state steps in, others step back. Edmund Burke warned that society thrives when responsibility is carried by its little platoons, families, faith groups, and local communities. These small, organic institutions bind people together and cultivate a sense of duty. When the government absorbs their role, it doesn't just provide. It weakens the very structures that hold society together. The more we expect the state to feed our children, the less we expect families to do it. The more we rely on bureaucracy to solve social problems, the more civil society withers. The government is not neutral. It can often be inefficient, bureaucratic, and expensive. Evidence? Health New Zealand's $28 billion Excel spreadsheet. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Taxpayers foot the bill, yet the actual cost is cultural. Every new government service creates dependence, and dependence runs the risk of control. As Roger Scruton said, top-down government breeds irresponsible individuals and widespread refusal among the citizens to act for themselves. So, how do we turn back? Not abrupt cuts, but gradual shifts. Support local solutions. Schools partnering with charities and businesses rather than defaulting to government programs. Empower parents. Provide resources that help families rather than replace them. Redefine fairness, not as equal outcomes dictated from above, but as communities supporting their own. Kiwis are proud, independent people, but at present there's a certain dullness of spirit. Let's revive it, not by demanding more from the state, but by reclaiming what we've lost: community, responsibility, and self-reliance. Philosophically and culturally, there's no free lunch.